Good morning or good afternoon. I am home today with a sick child, so regrettably I can't be here. So what I've done is I've recorded my lecture that I plan to give you today on the Holocaust. This was tough for me because this is probably the hardest lecture that I give all year long given the subject matter. And I want to let you know that Ms. Heining, who is your sub today, is she's has some background on the Holocaust, and so if you do have any questions, I do feel confident that she can answer them for you. But I also will set aside some time the next time I see you in class if you have any lingering questions. This is a very difficult topic. The Holocaust basically deals with genocide, and for those of you who are not familiar with that term, genocide refers to targeting a particular group of people based on their race or ethnicity for murder. And in this particular case, we're going to be focusing on the genocide of the Jewish people that were found in Europe by the Nazis before and during the time of World War II. So a term that I need to define for you before we go any further is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism refers to discrimination or hatred of those of the Jewish faith. And this has been going on for centuries. It involves religious, economic, or cultural or racial feelings towards the Jewish people in a discriminatory way. And this has been going on, like I said, for thousands of years. Probably the most famous and earliest known example of anti-Semitism was the enslavement of the Jewish people by the ancient Egyptians. And if you're familiar with the Christian Bible, you know the story of Moses and how he leads the Jewish people to freedom. And they find settlement in a place called Israel, which is located in the Eastern Mediterranean, right about here. But not long after that, they are conquered and expelled from that area by the ancient Romans. And as you can see from the map down at the bottom, you can see they spread out all through Europe, only to be constantly expelled from different places. It seems that they are a group of a community that is constantly under anti-Semitism, under discrimination, and either asked to convert to a new religion or asked to leave. If you look in the upper left-hand corner here, and even as late as 1791, Catherine the Great, the queen or the empress of Russia at the time, forced all of those of Jewish faith to move out of Russia and into an area in that white area called the Pale of Settlement. A lot of that area becomes countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, and so you see a huge ethnic and cultural concentration of Jewish people in that area. And by the time the rise of the Nazi regime in the 1930s, those are areas that end up becoming under Nazi control. So where did the Nazis' anti-Semitism come from? Hitler had been preaching this brand of anti-Semitism for many, many years before he became the leader of Germany. And his anti-Semitism is rooted in this idea known as Aryan supremacy. And basically Hitler's belief is that the German people, thousands of years ago, were descended from a group of individuals known as the Aryans, who migrated to Europe from India. So these are Indian people. And, you know, a lot of you are familiar with the German swastika, the Nazi swastika, which you can see in this picture here on the flags being flown. And that symbol Hitler actually borrowed from the ancient Aryan people. It is a symbol that actually means luck and goodwill, and it is something that is used in Hinduism and Buddhism, and he converted that symbol to symbolize this new ruling of the Aryan people. So Hitler's goal from this logic was to purify the German people and to cleanse it of all different races and ethnicities except for this one Aryan race, and expand that Aryan race to be superior throughout the world. And conversely, he wanted to rid the world of what he thought to be an inferior race, and that especially targeted the Jews. He felt not only were they an inferior race, but he did blame them for many of the ills that Germany had suffered during the years prior to World War II. He felt that while many German people languished during the German Depression, the German Jews actually prospered and did not do anything to help their fellow Germans. So one of the first things that Hitler does when he comes to power is he mounts this huge propaganda campaign to promote this vision of Aryan supremacy, and he hires scientists to kind of prove genetically and scientifically that those of the Aryan race are superior. And you can see in some of these visuals what they've done is they've taken facial measurements. The picture in the upper left, the poster with the different faces and the side profiles, shows you what an Aryan German would look like from the north, from the central, and from the southern part of Germany, to kind of give you a sense of what physical features they would have. If you look in that central picture, that's that ideal that the Aryan race is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed family that has, strong physique. And if you look over here on the right, there's even a quote from a popular magazine that came out during the time. It says, "The Aryan race is tall, long-legged, slim. The race is narrow-faced with a narrow forehead and a narrow high-built nose and a lower jaw and prominent chin. The skin is rosy bright and the blood shines through. The hair is smooth, straight or wavy, possibly curly in childhood. The color is blonde." So that is the description of what an ideal Aryan would look like. Not to say that there weren't brunette Aryans. I know a lot of you are thinking that, but most of those characteristics, Hitler and the Nazis were confident that they could tell somebody just by looking at their physical features. And if you look at the bottom picture on the left there, that's even a scientist, so supposedly measuring the facial features of this person to prove whether or not they belong to the Jewish people or not. Conversely, you have propaganda that shows the Jewish people in a very sinister or negative way. That picture on the left there is a poster for an anti-Semitic film called The Eternal Jew that came out in 1941. And you can see just from the poster there, the images of these individuals who are apparently of Jewish faith look very sinister, look very menacing, very scary. In German schools during the time, there was a huge campaign just within the daily lessons to educate Germans on how to tell a Jew. And in fact, I'm going to read you an excerpt from a children's story that was very common during the time. And so as I'm reading it to you, this picture here on the right comes from that story. And so you can kind of visualize the conversation through this image. Quote, "Things are lively here in Mr. Berkman's 7th grade boys' class today. The teacher is talking about the Jews. Mr. Berkman has drawn pictures of Jews on the blackboard. The boys are fascinated. 'It is noon,' he says. 'We should summarize what we have learned in the past hour. What have we talked about?' All the children raise their hands. 'We have talked about how to recognize the Jews.' Little Carl reaches for the pointer, steps up to the board, and points at its drawings. 'One can most easily tell a Jew by his nose. The Jewish nose is bent at its point. It looks like the number 6. We call it the Jewish 6. Many non-Jews also have bent noses, but their noses bend upwards, not downwards. Such a nose is a hook nose or an eagle nose. It is not at all like a Jewish nose.' The teacher calls on another lad. He is Fritz Müller. 'Jews are usually small to mid-size. They have short legs. Their arms are often very short, too. Many Jews are bow-legged and flat-footed. They often have a low, slanting forehead and a receding forehead. Many criminals have such a receding forehead. The Jews are criminals, too. Their hair is usually dark and often curly like a Negro's. Their ears are very large, and they look like the handles of a coffee cup.' 'Very good,' the teacher says. 'And now tell me other ways to tell Jews from non-Jews.' Richard Krause, a smiling blond lad, goes to the board. He says, 'One can recognize a Jew from his movements and behavior. The Jew moves his head back and forth. His gait is shuffling and unsteady. The Jew moves his hands when he talks. He jabbers. His voice is often odd. He talks through his nose. Jews often have an unpleasant sweetish odor. If you have a good nose, you can smell the Jews.' The teacher is satisfied." So this comes from a children's story, again, where the boys in the class are reciting what they have been taught about Jewish people. Obviously, very negative stereotypical characteristics based on physical features. But this is the kind of propaganda, this is the kind of message that the Jewish government was requiring the German government was requiring German schools to pass along to their people. So now that you understand the background between what anti-Semitism means and what the Nazi belief in Aryan supremacy is, you can now see how this combination led Hitler to target the Jewish people and to eventually design a program that would rid Europe of the Jewish population. And the eventual extermination of Jews and other groups who were deemed undesirable or inferior by the Nazi people is known as the Holocaust. I'm going to bring you through it in stages, because the Nazi Party does not start out immediately with extermination in mind, and much of what happens before World War II begins. So stage one is a boycott, and as soon as Hitler comes to power in 1932, he sets about trying to harm the Jewish communities economically. There were many Jewish businesses all throughout Germany, and as early as 1933, the Nazi Party begins to harass and to threaten German Jews who own businesses as a way to get them to lose customers. So I'd like to show you a video of a newsreel that comes out of Germany at the time that shows you some German businesses that are being targeted for boycott. And the sign basically says shop only at German stores, as if Jewish people are not German. You can see a symbol being painted on this particular store. This is the Star of David, which symbolizes somebody of Jewish faith, and it was a way for people to know to not shop there. Of course, you've got German troops standing in front of stores as kind of a way to intimidate. By 1935, the Nazis are ready to move on to another stage of the Holocaust, and this is basically legal discrimination, and the Nazis meet in a city called Nuremberg in Germany, where they pass a series of laws mainly aimed at taking away all rights of Jewish citizens in Germany. The biggest aspect of the Nuremberg laws was that you were not allowed to marry somebody who was Jewish if you were of the Aryan race, and vice versa. This is forbidding intermarriage. And the other major aspect of the Nuremberg laws was that it took away German citizenship and any corresponding rights from Jews, such as your right to trial if you're accused of a crime, or your right to your freedom of speech. Those basic rights that German citizens all enjoyed, including if you were Jewish, were no longer afforded to those who were Jewish. And even more importantly, without without German citizenship, you don't have a passport. You're not able to leave the country at will. This is an actual poster that shows you the breakdown of how you would know if you were a Jewish person. And this is where people get confused, because we know the Jewish people as a religion. It's a faith, and the idea is you believe what you believe, and if you don't believe, you don't believe. But the German government, the Nazi government at the time, considered being a Jew an ethnicity, and so you were born as a Jew. It was not something that you could change after you were born. And so looking at this particular chart, the first two sections on the left show those of the Aryan race. If you had just one person, that black circle there, one person of Jewish heritage, that was okay. You move into the middle of the Mischling, that's half Jew. And if you were a half Jew, you weren't subject to any of the discriminatory laws, but you were not able to marry anybody from the previous two categories. And then, as you can see over on the two right-hand columns there, and at the top it says Jude, those two categories would classify somebody as somebody of the Jewish people. And so that would be anybody who comes from 3 grandparents or 4 grandparents who were of Jewish descent. They would use this chart to determine whether or not you were able to marry somebody who was Aryan or not. I'd like to show you a video clip of a gentleman talking about another aspect of the Nuremberg laws that I'm going to describe to you in a second.
Then came a decree one day that you had to wear a star.
All Jews had to wear a star. They went out of the house. So my mother sewed on stars on my clothes. And I remember an incident. I have a cousin. My cousin Hans. He lives in Springfield, Massachusetts now. He's about my age. At the time we looked a little bit similar. And we had both gotten the same overcoats from my father's former clothing store, so we looked like twins. And Hans always gets, let's go out and walk like twins. So we put on the same socks, as much as possible, same muffler, and we walked as twins. That was wonderful. Except I had a star, he didn't. Well, that was the only thing different. His mother, my Aunt Clara, had married a non-Jew. So Hans was only half Jewish. And I remember walking through Delft and once get stopped by a German. It's the only time the German physically touched me. I was stopped by this German. We were stopped by this German in our same overcoats. And the German said to my cousin, Hans, what do you do walking with a Jew? And I said, he's my cousin. And the German slapped me full in the face and I fell on the ground. Pow! Like this. And said something like, you lousy Jew. And he said to my cousin, don't let me ever see you walking with him. With a Jew.
That gentleman's name is Edward Lessing, and he's a Holocaust survivor. And he's describing another aspect of the Nuremberg laws, and that was identification. Those of the Jewish community all had to register their IDs, and those identification cards had to have a J for Jew on the card. You can see it's a fancy looking J there on the left. All Jewish people had to have the identification name of Sarah if they were female, or Israel if they were male, as part of their name on those new identification cards. If you look on the right here, you can see the stars that Mr. Lessing was referring to in his account that had to be pinned onto all clothing at all times. So walking down the street, anybody, any police officer, any member of the military would know right away if you were a member of the Jewish community. Some other discriminatory laws that came out of the Nuremberg laws included that Jews were forbidden from working as lawyers, judges, or anybody in government positions. They didn't want anybody of the Jewish community in any kind of civil service position where they would make laws or conduct public policy. So literally overnight sometimes many of those who held those positions were let go and then unemployed. After a while, Jewish children were forbidden from playing with other children, had to go to separate playgrounds, separate pools, very similar to the segregation laws that we found in the South, the Jim Crow laws found in the South with African Americans. By 1936, again, any Jew who had previously converted to Christianity was reclassed again as Jewish, reestablishing that belief that you are born Jewish. It is not a religious choice, it is an ethnicity. By 1938, all Jewish people were no longer allowed to own their own businesses. They had to sell or give them away. And again, Jews are segregated from places like movies, concerts, and even swimming pools. By 1938, Jewish children are expelled from German schools and have to create their own separate schooling system. This is an image of a particular Jewish business that used to be, again, Jewish, but then was reappropriated as a business for a non-Jewish German. Next incident during the Holocaust has to do with a particular night of violence called Kristallnacht. And before I give you any more details about it, I want to play for you one Holocaust survivor's account of this particular incident.
It was on the eve of my mother's birthday. It was November the 9th, and my brother and I were very excited because it was going to be our mother's birthday the next day, November the 10th. And we had just about fallen asleep. Maybe it was around 11 o'clock. And all of a sudden, some bricks and rocks were being thrown through our window. And my brother, who's always been braver than I am, even though he's a year younger than I am, went to the window and he pulled himself up on the windowsill and he looked outside and he said, "It's our neighbors that are throwing the rocks and the bricks through the window." And he said our civil policeman that we knew very well was standing there on the outside of the crowd, and he was standing like this.
So these are people you knew, had a relationship with, were friends with?
Yeah. And the policeman did absolutely nothing to stop them. And so we were really very frightened. And we said, well, we're going to go to our parents' bedroom and find out what's happening. So while we were crossing the hall to go to our parents' bedroom, some of the people, some of our neighbors, had uprooted a telephone pole, and they smashed the telephone pole through our front door, which was made out, the panes were this beautiful color of green and red and blue, and they smashed through our door, and the glass fell all over our hallway. And their objective really was to get upstairs to the rabbi who lived on the second floor. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the way our building was made. My family lived on the first floor, and the rabbi of the town, we had one rabbi, because the town, Bad Kreuznach, was pretty small, and he lived on the second floor, and on the third floor, a non-Jewish family, and then on the fourth floor, there was an attic. Well, anyway, so the biggest objective for these people that had rammed the telephone pole through our front door was to go through our hall and vandalize some of our belongings, but really to get upstairs to the rabbi's apartment. And so we ran across the hall to our parents' bedroom, and they always had told us, they tried to protect us, they always had told us everything was going to be all right, don't worry, this is not going to last. And so my father said, well, let's go and hide up in that attic on the fourth floor where we'll be safe.
So Ms. Wersinger is giving her account of what is known as Kristallnacht. And Kristallnacht happens on November 9th, 1938. And what it means in German is Night of the Broken Glass. And what happened that night was a wave of violence against Jewish communities in Germany that were kind of done under the table by Nazi stormtroopers. It wasn't a direct order by the military or by the Nazi government to do so, but it was done without any kind of worry about disguise. And as you heard from Ms. Warsinger, it was a lot of community members joined in as well. And basically it was a huge attack on any Jewish business, any Jewish home, Jewish synagogues, which are their places of worship. In addition, there were many attacks on Jewish people themselves. About 100 Jewish people were killed at that evening in various different areas due to beatings. And the whole issue that set off this wave of violence was retaliation for the death of a German officer who died in Paris a couple days earlier. And when it was found out that he had died because of a Jewish person, that was enough for the Nazi Party to use that as retaliation, or to use that as motivation for this wave of violence throughout Germany. To make matters worse, the next morning the Jewish community was ordered by the Nazi Party to clean up all the damage. That was not of their own doing, but that was done of the Nazi regime. Here are some images of the damage done during Kristallnacht. You can see this is where the Night of Broken Glass gets its name. Obviously, a lot of these storefronts were destroyed through stones being thrown. That bottom left-hand picture shows a particular building that had been burnt, and you can see word had even reached the United States about the incident, and how it was very well known that the Jewish people were required to clean up and being fined for all the damage that was being done, or that had been done that night. The next stage of the Holocaust happens behind the veil of war. We know that in 1939, Germany invades Poland and war begins. And once that happens, it's much harder to see what's going on within the boundaries of Germany. And so by 1940, the Nazi government decides that it wants to segregate and relocate the Jewish people into areas of cities called ghettos. Ghettos are closed-off sections of cities that were surrounded by fences. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get out unless you were given specific permission, and there were only certain checkpoints that you could do so. All the entries were guarded by the German police, and again, you were not allowed out without permission. Initially, Jewish people were still able to leave during the daytime to go to jobs or to go shopping, or do whatever it is that they wanted to do during the day. But soon that also subsided, and they were locked in all day long. These ghettos were definitely not big enough for the Jewish population that was sent to live in them, and they suffered from immense overcrowding issues. Since they weren't able to get out after a certain point, the Nazi government was responsible for sending in food rations and health rations, and you find that the Nazi government does not adequately provide the Jewish people in these ghettos with enough food, medicine, clean water, and you see a lot of death in these ghettos from malnutrition, from illness, from disease, and it becomes a very rampant problem in these ghettos. If you look at the picture in the upper left, you see a line of individuals waiting to be admitted into one of the ghettos in one of the cities. And oftentimes you hear stories of Jews saying that there was a knock on the door in their neighborhood one day or one evening, and it was a Nazi officer letting them know that they needed to pack up whatever they could carry and be out of their house in a matter of minutes or hours, depending on how urgent it was. And so Jewish people were leaving everything they owned. They were leaving their homes, their furniture, their belongings, and only bringing with them what they could carry. And as soon as they leave their homes, their homes are, they're confiscated, their materials, their property is confiscated by the Nazis and reappropriated, to other people. That picture on the right, you can see how they would fence in these ghettos, these parts of the city, to create these Jewish ghettos, and these fences would just show up overnight, and they would have really no rhyme or reason. They were just, like I said, designed to fence in the Jewish community at that time to keep them from mingling and escaping out into the larger population. That bottom left-hand picture you can see shows the immense crowding that's happening in these ghettos. Some more pictures. You learned last week about the rationing of food in America to help increase the supply of food to be sent to soldiers abroad. Well, in these ghettos, if you were lucky, you were given a ration card that would allow you, maybe a half a loaf of bread for a day. I mean, a lot of these ghetto populations subsisted on very little nutrition. Loaf of bread, maybe a vegetable or two, not very much to stay healthy. And again, that bottom picture on the bottom right shows you another image of just how desolate and overcrowded these ghettos were. A couple more images of ghetto life. The top part in the upper left-hand corner, some of the Jewish community were required to work. And they were considered the lucky ones sometimes, in that they were allowed to leave the ghetto area and go work and come back, and they would be given, meager rations as compared to others in the ghetto area. Picture on the right, upper right, is a map of the ghetto that's located in the city of Warsaw in Poland. And just looking at that purple boundary area, you can just see just how there was no rhyme or reason to how they walled off the ghetto area. And again, it was a very random and happened overnight many times to fill this area up. Bottom left shows you the incidences of malnutrition and starvation, and a lot of children were neglected or left orphaned because of inability to feed them. And then that bottom right-hand picture shows you, people overlooking the wall that had been built to keep them inside. At the same time that these Jewish ghettos were being formed in cities across the German area, many Jewish people and others who were prisoners or other undesirable groups of people were sent to concentration camps located around the German-occupied territories. And they were sent there for hard labor. They were sent there not expected to survive, worked literally to death in very squalid conditions, very little nutrition, and the goal was just to get as much work out of these prisoners as possible before they died. And this map shows you the extent of all of those camps. And if you remember me saying earlier that, a lot of Jewish communities settled in this Eastern European area here, you can see why there are a lot of camps that tended to pop up in these areas. This brings me to the final stage of the Holocaust, which is the one that is the most upsetting, the one that is the most acts of atrocity, and that would be the final stage, which was death, the genocide of the Jewish people. About 1942, the leaders of the Nazi Party decided that it would be in their best interests to go forward with a policy of exterminating all Jews from Europe. They felt that maintaining them in ghettos or in concentration camps, or even expelling them from the German-occupied area, would be too much money. And so they decided that the most economical thing would be to commit genocide. They called this plan their final solution, and they start plans to carry out these killings. You've got millions of Jewish people who are being captured right now at this time, and so they have to start planning the logistics for this genocide. Many of the concentration camps that I spoke of a second ago were transformed into death camps or extermination camps, and they were built solely for the purpose of killing mass amounts of people in large numbers quickly. Once the logistics were in place, the Nazis turned towards the Jewish ghettos that they had created, and they start to evacuate these ghettos and sending their populations to the extermination camps. People in the ghettos were told to pack up, that they would be moving to a work camp east, and they were put on trains. These trains were absolute horrors. They were packed to the gills. And let me show you an image here in the upper left-hand corner here. You can see one of these trains as it arrives at an extermination camp. It's packed. There were no bathrooms. There was no food. This one is an open-topped car. Many of the cars were closed cars, and so you had issues with being able to breathe. There's no place to sit, and so a lot of people died just on their way to these extermination camps. Once there, you were taken off the train. You were asked to put all of your belongings into a pile in one place, and you were put into two lines. The first line was made up of mainly young men and women, those who the Nazis felt were strong enough that they could use them again for hard labor, to help continue to feed the Nazi war machine in factories or whatever kind of various tasks. The other line was filled with elderly, those who were sick, women, and young children. That group was sent to a large building where they were locked in and gassed with a poison that led to their death. And this happened for the next 3 years to millions and millions of Jewish people. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, this gives you a basic map of one of the extermination camps and how it was set up just for this one purpose. Many people lost their lives this way. Many families perished in this way. By 1944, Soviet troops began to push the German forces back into Poland, and they're coming from the east. Meantime, and as they're moving west, they start to come across these extermination camps and these concentration camps, and they're starting to liberate those who happen to still be alive at that time. In the meantime, you have the U.S. and the British forces coming in from the west and moving east, kind of squeezing Germany on both sides. The Soviets and the U.S. and British are, and they're finding similar discoveries of concentration extermination camps throughout France or throughout Belgium or throughout Western Germany, and liberating those in those camps as well. Imagine you're an American soldier and you come across one of these camps and you see the emaciated figures, those who just are barely alive, and you see the mass graves of those who have died through the genocide, and you have no idea why or what has been going on at this time. Here's some images of that liberation. You can see that a lot of the survivors look like they are very malnourished and have not eaten very well, have a lot of illnesses. You can see that they're wearing kind of prison garb, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner that oftentimes the Allied troops would come across just massive amounts of dead bodies. Numbers-wise, the final solution killed about 6 million Jewish people. Another 5 million were killed through similar means because they were in some other way inferior according to the Nazi Party. It's good to know that after the war, many Nazis were rounded up and were put on trial for war crimes, crimes against humanity, to serve time or to be executed for what they did. Over 5,000 Nazi criminals were convicted and were executed. Another 10,000 who were found guilty of war crimes were imprisoned. Many more did get away, escaped Germany or escaped conviction. As for the Jewish people, they were given, after World War II, an area of land east on the Mediterranean, in the same area that they had found after escaping slavery in ancient Egypt. This area is known as Israel, And so the Jewish people finally had a place that they could call home, an actual nation that they could belong to as a people. And this is an image of it today. If you're familiar with current events, you know that this is an area that has a lot of tension, because when you give land to a group of people, you're taking land away from another group that had been set up there for a while. And so there's been a lot of conflict between the Jewish and the Palestinians, which is that red striped area that you see that still goes on today. I hope this gave you a decent amount of information about the events of the Holocaust. My goal for you was to be sensitive and not graphic. There are many stories of atrocity, many graphic stories of inhumanity that have been told, and I don't feel comfortable getting into those specific graphic accounts, but I did want to be truthful to you as to what happened in terms of extermination and genocide. I do encourage you to seek out what you feel you are ready to seek out in terms of more information and more stories behind this very large event that happened. And again, I will be open for questions when I see you again in class next time. Thanks for taking the time to go through these notes, and I will see you soon.